Alberta Primetime with Michael Higgins.
Welcome to Alberta Primetime. Ahead tonight, our politics panel on an Alberta Party leadership change. But first, recall contention.
I'm hearing a lot of frustration from Albertans that they're making a mockery of what should be a very important mechanism to address elected officials who genuinely aren't doing their job or who have misbehaved in a certain way.
The Premier responding to the ever-expanding list of MLAs facing recall petitions, a list that now includes Danielle Smith herself, one element of a fall sitting filled with contention. And joining us now for a year-end conversation, NDP leader Naheed Nenshi. Mr. Nenshi, good to see you, sir. Welcome back.
Oh, thanks so much, Michael. Always a pleasure. And yes, sitting full of contention is, shall we say, one way of putting it.
Well, let's maybe start on how you feel about a recall petition that targets the Premier.
Well, you know, in that clip that you just played, it's Christmas time and I want to be generous, but the hypocrisy there is off the charts. This is her legislation. Her government put forward this legislation. When it was used against Mayor Gondek in Calgary, she was an enthusiastic cheerleader for it. And now that it is being used against all these UCP MLAs, people are misusing it. She has compared grandmas going door to door in Bowness and Calgary with militants overthrowing her government. Now, if in fact she believed that recall should only be used in these extreme circumstances, she ought to have written the legislation that way. The legislation is very clear that anybody can launch a recall against any MLA. The boundary for the number of signatures you need is very high. It's incredibly flawed legislation, but it is the UCP's legislation. And for them to lash out against citizens using their legislation, I think is a bit rich.
Okay, a plethora of voices out there claiming the NDP is among those behind this ever-growing list of recall petitions. How do you respond to that?
Oh, I wish I had that kind of time. Have you seen this legislative session? No, they're looking for someone to blame. They're saying it's the union thugs, it's the New Democrats who are doing this. The reality is these are everyday citizens who had enough of this government. And just to be clear, we have nothing to do with this. In fact, I don't even know most of the citizens who have put forth these nominations. Certainly a lot of New Democrat supporters, I think, are volunteering with some of these nominations, as they did with the Forever Canada petition, but this is a grassroots movement, and that's what scares the Premier the most.
Okay, let's go back to fall sitting, the contention over a multitude of bills and amendments, and there isn't the time for us to go through all of them, but to what degree has this session been defined by the government's use of the notwithstanding clause?
Well, you know, this was my very first session, right? And I wasn't expecting that on my very first day in the legislature, the government would, for the first time in Alberta's history, preemptively use the notwithstanding clause, which sounds like a technical term. What it means is, for the first time in Alberta's history, the government knowingly passed a law that they knew to be unconstitutional. And then they did it 3 more times. So what's happening here is we had 14 bills come to the House. Not one of them was about cost of living. Not one of them was about a job strategy for Alberta or improving the economy. The ones that were about healthcare, which Albertans care about, you know, were about going after a few dozen trans kids and about privatizing the healthcare system. The only one about education was forcing the teachers back to work using the notwithstanding clause. There were many, many different options here, but 2 things happened. Number one is it's a government that's largely incompetent. They could have avoided the teachers' strike without spending a ton of money just by doing it correctly. They certainly could have introduced legislation or a rule outside of the legislature to end the strike without needing to use the notwithstanding clause. But a couple of their ministers recently admitted that they were always planning on using the notwithstanding clause, and they were never planning on giving teachers a good deal because it would have been too expensive for them. And remember, we have the lowest funding for education in the country. And why did they use it again on the trans kids? Those laws had already been passed. They're already in place. And any legal action on them would take years to unravel. And will happen anyway, because the Supreme Court has hinted that they're willing to look at these cases even with the use of the notwithstanding clause. Why did they do it? It's because they feel cornered. They feel scared. Their government is threatened, and they wanted to go back to these old culture wars in the hopes that that would get people excited for their government again, and it's not working.
Okay. Aside from all the bills that were brought forward that were passed. Another dominant discussion emerging through the sitting, the Smith and Carney government signing an MOU. You've given it something of a stamp of approval, stating everyone needs to roll up their sleeves. So what is your party prepared to do to make a new pipeline to the coast happen?
Yeah, well, let's remember that Alberta's New Democrats did make a new pipeline to the coast happen, the only one in 50 years. Conservative governments have not built 1 meter of pipeline, 1 mile of pipeline to Tidewater in all the years they've been in power. So you don't get to be the mayor of Calgary for 11 years without really understanding the energy industry and without really understanding what it takes to get a pipeline built. So look, the MOU is fine. The part of the MOU that the Premier never talks about is how it actually forces her to put some teeth behind her own environmental plan. So we're now committed to net zero by 2050. We have to increase the industrial carbon price. We've got to do a number of other things. So that's not a bad thing. And by the way, this deal is very similar to the one that Rachel Notley came to with the previous government. But the difference is Rachel Notley's deal came with a pipeline. It came with $40 billion. It came with a real climate action plan. So, you know, people always ask me, is this a win for Alberta? Well, yeah, it's a win, but it's more like a goal in the first period of a hockey game. You want that goal, but there's a lot of game left to play. And we've got to be able to, as you say, roll up our sleeves, work with Indigenous communities, work with communities along the coast, work with other politicians and other orders of government. And I've already talked to David Eby about, you know, how he feels about the whole thing, and get it done. And that's ultimately what the success will be measured on.
Okay, I believe you mentioned earlier this was your first fall sitting, so maybe as a final question, your key takeaway from 2025, now that you're finally in the legislature as an MLA as well as leader of the opposition.
Well, I'm grateful to be in the legislature. I'm grateful to the people of Edmonton Strathcona for putting their trust in me and this guy from Calgary. And the legislature is sort of everything I thought it would be, and also kind of surprising. You know, being there every day, my very first day in the House, we stayed until 2 in the morning. We've had to stay until 2 in the morning another couple of times. I have given 3 of the longest speeches in the legislature in many decades to try and get our points across. But what I've really been surprised about is how this government across the aisle is really making it up as they go along. Meanwhile, Alberta's New Democrats, you know, we introduced bills on the minimum wage, motion on shrinkflation, motions to protect healthcare workers, to build out our electricity grid in new ways, many things that you'd think the Conservatives would actually go towards because it gives them some policy options on things that we agree on. They rejected them all. But what my goal was this fall was to really show Albertans what a new Democrat government would look like, to help Albertans understand that you have another option and you don't have to stand for this divisiveness and this rhetoric and these culture wars, but together we can build a better Alberta. And I think that we really succeeded in doing that.
All right. We'll have to leave it there. Appreciate your time this evening, Mr. Nenshi, as always. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Merry Christmas, everyone, and all the best for 2026.
You as well. Naheed Nenshi is leader of Alberta's New Democrats.